My name is Manuel Criollo, and I'm the Director of Organizing for the Labor Community Strategy Center, and I'm here on behalf of the Community Rights Campaign and our Taking Action Clubs. And also a member of Dignity in Schools Campaign and the Los Angeles Brothers, Sons, and Self Coalition. We're honored to be able to speak on this important panel to contribute to this discussion. We believe that, as we unpack the real impacts of suspensions, expulsions on youth of color here in California, we also have to discuss the more direct school-to-jail track that exists in our schools today, especially to examine the role of law enforcement and the criminal justice system in our schools. This school-to-jail track has four main branches. The first branch is the actual criminalization of school-based offenses and other educational matters like school attendance on a local and state level that applies to either students or to their parents. One here in Los Angeles, for example, Community Rights Campaign with many of our allies in Dignity in Schools Campaign led an important struggle toward decriminalizing student tardiness and truancy here in LA City and LAUSD. In 5 years, between 2004 and 2009, over 47,000 daytime curfew tickets were handed out by Los Angeles School Police and the Los Angeles Police Department. Significant of those numbers of those tickets were given to students as they headed to school. Over 92% of the tickets were given to students of color. The tickets came with a hefty cost of $250 to $1,000 per ticket. Students and parents had to miss school, had to miss work to go to court appearances. Hundreds of students reported to us that the ticketing wasn't the big problem. The huge problem was the actual encounter with a police officer. Often came with handcuffing, often came with transporting, often meant, dragging them throughout the school in handcuffs as they're given a ticket. Tens of thousands of students actually and youth and young adults that today as we speak don't have driver's licenses because they owe thousands of dollars to these tickets. Ultimately, these tickets had the impact of actually discouraging young people not to come to school, and rarely were they ever asked, why are you missing school or why are you coming late to school? The second branch is the reliance of law enforcement and school security in our schools, which either through de facto or through direct school policy, police officer and school security become interveners in school discipline matters. Here in Los Angeles Unified, we host the largest school police department in the country. And LAPD and LAUSD has released critical data on school-based citations and arrests to many community advocates here in Los Angeles. And the data that they showed covered 3 years. Of those 3 years, 33,000 tickets were given to young people. Almost 40% of those tickets were given to children 14 and younger. 18% of those tickets went to black youth, even though they only make 10% of the LAUSD population. Almost 30% of all those tickets for disturbing the peace were actually given to black youth. When we look at the counterpart toward white students make about 8% of the student population at LAUSD, only 4% of the tickets given to them. When we look at it, virtually all these citations were for nonviolent offenses. Now, obviously, there's some good news. LASPD tickets have progressively gone down by 16% over the last 2 years. A contributor has been all the work that we've done around trying to decriminalize tardy and truancy. And in 2012, those numbers continue to go down. And the third branch is the application of the justice system on students applying the legal penal code on school discipline matters. In other words, in our schools, the school becomes a minefield of actual broken laws that you could break. And the last one is for those last branches, for those youth coming back from the system. Either they're ill-educated as when they're locked up, but more importantly, as they come back, often face a lot of stigmatization of coming back to school and often end up to being pushed out. Los Angeles, of course, is changing that direction, and we helped revise a daytime curfew law that protects youth from tardy tickets and adopts a more service-oriented approach, which was spearheaded by Councilman Tony Cardenas. This law was supported by the majority of LAUSD board members. We secured an LAPD directive. Last year, there was about a 40% reduction in LAPD citations. LASPD had its own directive. We've had a 25% reduction in truancy tickets in 2011, and those numbers are continuing downward this year. Just last week, the newly opened youth workforce centers operated by LA City and supported by LAUSD were open. Instead of receiving truancy tickets, young people will have access to these centers after school and on weekends. They will be given an evaluation by PSA counselors and offered a set of services. Now, What these important breakthroughs show is that when there are deliberate plans, actual revisions to policies, and service-oriented, not a suppression-oriented policy, positive changes can come. Community Rights believes that we need an actual moratorium on all tickets and a permanent reduction of 75%. Lastly, I think what's going to be important is we need to move funds away from prisons, courts, and law enforcement and into our schools. We live in a state whose state's correction and prison budget surpassed our investment in higher education this year. We hope, again, that in these tight times, we make sound choices, not based on fear or what sounds good to voters, but will bring long-term support and success for youth and children in our schools.
Counsel, I did want to tell you that there is a school in OUSD that did away with suspensions last year as a result of the restorative practices efforts, and an alternative school, Bunch Academy, that I know you're familiar with, given the work that you did, that eliminated suspensions altogether. So we're on the journey. What I'm going to try to do in 5 minutes is go from like 25,000 feet cruising down to landing the plane around what our journey is. And what I want to talk about with OUSD is in no way about bragging about what we're doing or even coming from any place of hubris whatsoever. It's really just sharing with you what our journey is as a public institution in a city that has a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, and a lot of violence, and what we feel our responsibility is as the educational public institution to be a part of the solution for that in Oakland. And so that's what I want to talk to you about in my 5 minutes. So a few years ago, when Dr. Tony Smith, you saw in the last video, came into the school, by the way, our superintendent's entering his 4th year in OUSD. He's the first superintendent that can say that in the last 30 years. So that just gives you a little glimpse around the structural stress and distress, not just of our children that are in the system, but of the adults and the politics that holds that structure. And so it's no wonder our children aren't well taken care of when we have that kind of turnover in leadership. But we're really blessed with a great leader who can actually say he's entering his 4th year. And what I really want to talk to you about today is, and a lot of folks have talked about it here, this is our strategic plan. Our 165-page strategic plan boils down to this triangle. And it's just really the idea that not one of these strategies can stand on its own. That Hetty Chang, who runs Attendance Works, just sent me a survey around high school chronic absenteeism. 80% of high school students who miss 18 days or more said they missed school because they were bored. 80% said that was the reason why they missed 18 days or more. So let's not forget that high quality instruction, engaging instruction, linked learning, classrooms that actually connect a career are as important as developing social, emotional, and physical well-being with our young folks, and that we have to do them all with an equity lens and through an equity analysis to get where we want to go. And so everything that we're trying to do is to actually, within our districts, is to break through those silos and not just say, this whole issue around suspensions rests, Curtis, with your department, with family, school, and community partnerships. It rests equally with leadership, instruction, and curriculum. It rests equally with state and federal. It rests equally with the folks that run our quality school review process. And so the idea is really this integrated model around making sure all of our kids get to 100% instruction. The other thing that our superintendent says all the time is that culture eats strategy for lunch. Culture eats strategy for lunch. So we're doing PBIS, we do restorative justice, we're doing social emotional learning. We're blessed to be one of the 8 participating schools in the Counsel network, not this Counsel, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. With all of those strategies, the idea of actually getting to the point of changing core values and beliefs and changing the paradigm of the institution of the community and of how young people treat each other and how adults and young people treat each other, that doesn't come just because you're implementing the strategy. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that we need to do to take care of that. I just want to give you a little context for the city that we work in. West Oakland, so in Oakland, if anybody's from Northern California knows, we talk about Oakland in terms of the flats and in terms of the hills. And West Oakland is one of our neighborhoods in the flats. If you're an African-American child born in West Oakland, you're 5 times more likely to be hospitalized for diabetes, 2 times as likely to die of heart disease, 3 times more likely to die of a stroke, 2 times as likely to die of cancer than a child that was born just a few miles away in the Oakland Hills. That's the social context that we're working in. One person that we're working quite closely with to help us to actually frame the work that we're doing is Professor John Powell, who's now at the Haas Research Center around diversity. And Professor Powell has coined and done a lot of the research around targeted universalism, and that's another large framework that we're trying to work with. That we need some things for all of our kids. So we think about the RTI framework that universally we want all of our kids to be socially, emotionally healthy. We want them all to have breakfast every day, and we want them all to have those great things at the bottom. But we also cannot apply a race-neutral system or solution to a race-based issue. So whether you're doing PBIS or whether you're doing social emotional learning, whatever else is that you're doing, you have to get to the targeted intervention to address the young people that are showing up in all these statistics and all these personal stories that we've heard about, and I have 10 seconds left. So I'm going to try to land it really quickly. I just want to mention, if you go to our website, and we can talk about the reception, a few of our targeted approaches that are really promising. We have an Office of African American Malachievement run by Christopher Chapman. It's off the chart, stellar, good. In the 8 schools, we're doing manhood development classes. The African American boys that are in our manhood development classes have almost eliminated suspensions, increased their GPAs, and almost eliminated chronic absenteeism. And lastly, even though I'm out of time, I just want to say we're often asked to do things with our poorest children with the same amount of resources, and so these things do not come cheap. And if we really want to make an investment to do the things that were talked about, like at Garfield, to really turn schools around and help turn young people's lives around, we actually need the investment, because I'm not interested in nuggets. Lewis talked about nuggets. We're interested in transforming a whole system. I want all 40,000 of our students to be successful, not just students in one school. And so with that, it actually takes resources to scale up restorative justice. It takes resources to scale up PBIS. It takes resources to scale up SEL. And so that's just something politically as well. In addition to policy, we need to actually come together and rally around resources for this important work. Thank you.
So I want to just say a few things, because I look around this room and I see so many faces that I have not only seen here in LA, but I have seen in other communities, and I have seen in Sacramento. So I would like, first of all, show of hands if your organization, if you have testified in Sacramento, if you have called a legislator this year, if you have written a letter, if you have spoken to someone in the legislature. Please, everybody raise your hands who have done that. Okay, so what I want to say is we have the beginnings of a statewide movement, okay? And that this hearing today represents what that is starting to look like. And when I started doing this work as a, right out of law school lawyer, and I'm working in South LA, and I've got an education clinic, I did not know that this was going to be the #1 issue that came in every day to my clinic. It was open to the whole community. Anyone with an education problem could have come in, but it was over and over time again, kids who were being pushed out of school. And they were primarily our African American boys and our Latino boys. And so this issue has been an issue that has driven to my heart every time I would see a kid come in and tell me, I've not been given a chance. I'm being kicked out. And a mother who's crying in my office saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what the solutions are. Well, what you're hearing today are solutions, and some of those solutions you have all been a part of. And I want to really quickly talk about the legislation, and I'm not going to go through it because most of you know it already, right? But what I want to say is we have a huge opportunity right now. We are on the brink of potential big change here in California. We have 7 bills. 7 bills on school discipline and school to prison pipeline reform on the governor's desk. And that is because of everyone here, okay? And a lot of the conversations that we've been having today, the solutions are tied to all the stories that you have been hearing today. They are tied to the data. They came from the communities that you all work in. They came from the stories. And when I go and I speak to legislators about needing to change things, they listen. But when the young people in this room and the parents in this room and the researchers and the school administrators have come to speak to legislators, that's when they listen. And that is what we need to keep. We need to keep telling the stories, and we need to keep making it clear, because right now we are at a place where we could have change, but if the governor does not sign the bills, we've had a whole year of a whole lot of work without it. So we still have one final push. I'm going to tell you a couple quick things to just remind you of what's at stake. Our first bill, SB 1235, we've been talking about evidence-based solutions. This bill does two really important things. It has the State Department and the state looking at data to find out which are our schools in our state that are suspending the highest numbers of students, and which of them are suspending the highest numbers of students by race, gender, disability, ethnicity, okay? And then it says, hey, we're going to get you all into some regional forums with people and experts all around this room. So we're really excited because the California Department of Education is here with us today. But if this bill passes, they will be helping to lead this effort. And this will probably be the first time ever, well, it will be the first time ever in California that we have these kind of regional forums where schools that are struggling with learning how to make these changes are partnered with leaders from Oakland and LA and other places where we're learning how to make changes. It'll be places where experts and researchers and community members can all come together and start creating real professional learning communities where hopefully what we're talking about nuggets, right? We can scale up in a bigger way because we're all sharing. We're providing the training that the EdSource study provided in a real way, and we're connecting people so that ideas are being shared in this enormous state of ours at a much quicker pace. The second bill is about willful defiance, right? We started off at the beginning trying to actually eliminate suspensions for willful defiance. We tried to do what the vice principal at Garfield did and take it off the table and say, you've got to use alternative means. It died in appropriations, because the Appropriations Committee said, that will mean more students in school, and that costs the state more money. Yes, so we have some way to go on this, but it's on the governor's desk. It says no more suspensions for 5 days or longer for willful defiance, and it says no more expulsions. So it's still got some meat, and we need support. AB 1729, it starts to put some of the meat on what other means of correction is in the state, right? It says, if law already says suspension is supposed to be a last resort. Is it a last resort? Right? So, and what we've been hearing from school administrators around the state as we've been doing this is we want some more ideas. What else do we do? And so this helps to put some more meat on those bones and puts more of a focus on alternative means. It makes it more meaningful what an other means of correction is. AB 1909, we talked about foster youth and the impacts, and actually Jeffrey talked about how foster youth are disproportionately impacted as well, one of our huge categories. This helps bring some of our other leaders from the courts and from social workers in early on if a student's going to be expelled to bring in those resources. Again, the idea of bringing resources together. We're all working in silos, the court's in silo, child welfare's in silo. We need all of the resources to help focus on our schools to help our children learn and keep them in schools. AB 2537, you heard that amazing story from Deanna from Sacramento and her mother about how the school expelled her child when her child was, it was her first disciplinary offense. I heard a story today from the vice principal from Garfield about how the one suspension was because a student had brought a box cutter to school, and it's a mandatory suspension. It is a true zero tolerance expulsion offense, and he had to suspend, even though he really didn't want to, but the law required it. So AB 2537, it helps us give slightly more discretion to those administrators that want to do the right thing and take in other means of correction instead of expelling a student or suspending them. And it also clarifies that if you've got a Nerf gun or you bring a water gun, something that's already in the law that you shouldn't be expelled. We were seeing in Kern County and other places that there were this high rates of expulsion for our kids who were doing some offenses that are stupid, we know, but that shouldn't result in expulsion from the entire school district. And lastly, we heard from the young woman from Youth Justice Coalition about how when you actually do get into that pipeline, it is almost impossible to get out. You touch the juvenile justice system and you cannot get back in school. And when you cannot get back in school, that means that you are about to drop out, right? You're without future. And SB 1088 clarifies that law, gives us more tools to say there is a right. You have a right to come back to your school, and you have a right to come to your neighborhood school. and it's a really critical law. So these are all on the governor's desk. The last one is actually about truancy. It mirrors all the hard work that Dignity in Schools Public Counsel and Community Rights Campaign did around truancy, and it ensures that we lower that fine that's at the state level to mirror what we're doing at the local level. And it says instead of it being required that you send a child to the juvenile justice system who is going to be who has been truant, that you have a choice, that school district administrators can decide whether another solution will help keep that child in school. So we have a chance. We need all of you still to call the governor, to send letters, to let the folks at, who are highest up in our state know that this is important. And we have a long way still to go to actually get the stories that we're hearing here to all those people who make decisions at the statewide level. And I'm just here to say, please take action. You all are doing amazing work, and keep working with us, and let's keep building this momentum. Let's bring more people into the fold, and let's help make this in every community where we have people who are working hard on this issue. And you can also get involved and post your stories and your videos on fixschooldiscipline.org.
All right. Thank you, Laura. I just want to say that as a judge, the court has a role in this process also. We need to listen to the youth and families that come before us. We need to stop putting youth in juvenile hall for truancy. We need to stop putting youth in probation camps for misbehaving in school. So all these technical violations that come up, we need to find different ways to handle things. And so we're going to have just time for 2 questions. And I'm going to ask the people who are asking the questions to just ask 1 question each, no 2-part questions, because we truly only have 10 minutes. Crystal Valdez from Californians for Justice.
Hi. My question would be, under current state law, what could schools do to provide more productive alternatives for on-campus suspension rather than having our kids standing in a room, not being in a learning environment and wasting school funding?
Rosalind, did you want to take this on?
We've heard about today are some good examples, right? There really is no right way, and nor do I think there's a panacea. Programs, restorative justice done right provides a kind of good alternative. Restorative justice done wrong could result in what you're describing, where sort of students sitting without a kind of active and learning and engagement and instruction. So what is sure is that looking for those alternatives that still engage students, ensure that they are getting the academic and emotional interventions and supports that they might need, that brings community in, that ensures that adults and students work together on school culture, are among the better traits.
All right, thank you. Mitchell Rogers from Brotherhood Crusade.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My question is, so the principles of positive behavior support and restorative justice have been effectively integrated into Oakland school district schools. And although the positive behavior support models have been adopted, the same integration has not occurred in Los Angeles. Moreover, school officials claim that they have not implemented positive behavior support in their schools despite its adoption because no one has provided them with a model of implementation. So how can you help LAUSD integrate and implement these strategies?
Curtis, do you have any advice for Los Angeles?
I don't have any direct advice for Los Angeles. All I can say is that, I think it goes back to the last question, that you're on the right track. If the premise of what you're trying to do is to unconditionally create a culture of inclusion as opposed to one of exclusion, then you're going to be on the right track. The integration, I think it's what Secretary Ali just mentioned, is that, and the story of Garfield is unique, is that each school is unique, and rather than coming in with a prescription, you really want to create some models and some programs and some menus, and then go in and do some type of a needs assessment. Let that school community of students, parents, faculty think about what do we need, and have multiple entry points along that continuum. So if you have some really great Tier 1 stuff going on, but you don't have anything for youth reentering from juvenile probation or from other places outside the district, if you don't have an effective cost team, you really need to go through there and just find what are the multiple points of entry to make sure that you have a comprehensive continuum from universal prevention all the way up to intensive support for students across the board.
And can I just, Laura referred to this legislation that calls for regional forums of school districts, which seems like a terrific idea. Even if the law doesn't pass, that surely is something that school districts could, it's going to pass, you surely, so, and it's definitely going to happen. But sharing the experience of school districts and providing support for school officials to really implement these programs is the way to go.
Can I
Yes,
just think,
sure.
you know, in terms of just something concrete, you know, in the 90s, we saw, you know, the federal government put, you know, millions of dollars into school policing in our schools, you know, through the COPS programs. I think that that kind of robust sort of funding that we saw in the heyday of the 90s should go to support programs like, you know, restorative justice and PBIS. We can't. One of the things that's happening is that we're in a vacuum of trying to put these programs in a time period when thousands of teachers and adults have been, you know, thrown out of the schools. It just makes that work even much more harder. And it's pretty brilliant that schools are still trying their best even during those times. But we also have to, you know, really talk about how that kind of investment can actually happen.
Clarify one fact, which is that when these programs are put in place, schools are actually saving money. Okay, so
Yeah.
Pioneer High School in the Woodland area, they brought in $97,000 additional dollars because attendance went up. And I know that the vice principal from Garfield was telling me that their attendance rates went up at all. That's every child that we keep in school that we're not removing from school, that's additional dollars for that school, and it makes a huge difference. And I also just think that one of the really key things is we need to get more education and information about how it's working and who it's working with and where it's working throughout the state. We have to get it down to the school level. And one of the ways that I think we can do that also is by spreading the news that also federal law actually has funding for this, for PBIS and other things, and it's just not out there yet. So we need everybody's help. I mean, every single person here and more, so that we can really start to really say the barriers are not that high, and everything points to if you do this, your academic achievement goes up, the attendance goes up, all kids succeed. We don't really have a choice. This has to be the new model. It has to be the way that we change things in this state.
Absolutely. So we need to redirect our resources in the right places and approach things holistically from all different angles. And I know that Los Angeles is going to take the charge forward, and we will be the model for the country. So thank you, everybody.
That was an incredible panel, wasn't it? Let's give them another round of applause, please. Impressive. And again, you know, this theme of that's coming out here, this theme of commitment, the commitment from community, the commitment from advocates, the commitment from school district leaders, what Curtis and Tony Smith in Oakland are doing, and that mirrors what Ramiro is doing in Los Angeles is really impressive. You know, when we talk about kids are caught in the school discipline system, you know, we're really talking about the most vulnerable kids in our schools. We're talking about those kids who are most likely to drop out. We're talking about those kids who are most likely to get caught in the juvenile justice system, and then, as I said, move on to the adult justice system. Before I came to the California Endowment, I ran the juvenile reentry program for the city of Oakland in the Oakland Unified School District. And prior to that, I worked in schools with kids who were at risk of being suspended and expelled. And I saw those same kids who we could have reached in 6th grade end up in a place where it was much more difficult to reach them. when they were older coming through the justice system, after being suspended or kicked out of 3, 4, 5 schools in middle school. The last school that's going to take them is that school in juvenile hall. And that is something that we have a moral obligation to do something about as adults, dealing with kids as a community. And what's beautiful is that what Ramiro Rubalcaba showed was that, hey, when you actually focus on that, when you commit to doing something that I had not even comprehended, this idea of taking suspension off the table and we're going to keep all our kids there, guess what? That helps all the kids. That helps the adults and the teachers, right? I'll bet your teacher turnover went down, right? As your attendance went up and your achievement scores went up. This idea that everything, that the one thing that everyone cares about, these test scores, they still went up, keeping those hard-headed kids in your school, right? Okay, good. And so Secretary Ali said, she quoted President Obama in saying that education is a civil rights issue of our time. Some folks say, and what I believe is that addressing the school discipline issue, that's the key to fixing failing schools. That's the key to unlocking the door to walk through to fix failing schools. This idea that we are going to hold on to all of our kids. We're going to teach all of our kids, and we as the adults are going to take the lead and make that commitment. That's the key to fixing our schools, because those schools with high suspension rates are the schools with low API scores. They are the schools that are failing, and we can change that. And that, you know, the California Endowment, I'm glad that Curtis showed that slide that showed all that health data, right, when he's talking about school discipline, because it's a health issue, and we believe that. And this health and success is a very important issue. So before we go, I want to offer an opportunity for our distinguished sponsors and guests to come up very briefly, have a seat, and offer some final reflections on what they heard today for you, very briefly. So if Secretary Ali, if you could come up for a moment, and Gordon, Mr. Jackson, if you would come up, and Dr. Brian Nelson, if you would come up for just a moment and just have a seat. And Maisie Chin would also, with a community perspective, come up and offer some final reflections. I think that would be really outstanding. Very briefly.
I'll start by saying I didn't get a chance to speak earlier. I'm an assistant superintendent at the Department of Education working with Dr. Ellerby. And I can say that in my 33 years as a teacher, as a vice principal, as a board member, to this day, I've not seen this concentrated effort to do what must be done to make the difference. Unfortunately, it's tiring, and you'll need each other and other people that aren't in this room to sustain. If we can all think of that one student that we know of that has been, in essence, mistreated by the system, to hold that student's face before us as a reminder of the work that we need to continue to do to make the difference. There are other people that aren't in this room that I think can be great allies. The county system, the California County Systems of Superintendents, ACSA, California School Boards. There are other people that are, I think, very much invested and interested in this and just need to have awareness levels raised so that they too can chime in and say, enough is enough. We've got to make the difference. The State Department, although I sit in Sacramento on the 6th floor of the building, I just don't get to see it all throughout the state. So coming here and listening to you and hearing your voices matters and is incredibly helpful. And I thank you.
I would echo all of those remarks. I think one of the things that I've taken away from this is just sort of the spirit of cooperation among all the sort of interested parties in this, and sort of the shared spirit of wanting to improve what is a system that has obvious, and the data, wow, the data has so many problems in it, and the sort of deep and distressing impact it's had on children and students in California. So I think from my perspective, it's clear to me that together we can arrive at a much better result, that the sort of antidote to undirected or misdirected teacher discretion is this data and the shared desire to improve our system and make education and sort of all of the good and great things that flow from education available to every California child. So again, I just want to thank the California Endowment for inviting me here today. I think this was a really powerful day, and I will definitely take back the message of today to the Attorney General. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maisie Chin. I am the Executive Director of Cadre here in Los Angeles, and we are exceptionally proud to be behind this effort, and not only that, to be part of numerous coalitions that have emerged across the country, nationally with the Dignity in Schools campaign, here locally with the Dignity in Schools campaign, Los Angeles chapter, and certainly what we hope will be a California coalition across the state. And, you know, I know as one of the groups that helped start Dignity in Schools campaign, many of us know, and we're not the only ones, but many of the organizing groups in this room and who are also not in this room know that it took our community members to have the courage to tell their story to get this work on the map. Before there was data, there was an experience, a life that had to go through some pretty horrible situations. And so for us at Cadre and organizing parents in South LA around this issue for the last 7, 8, 10 years, we've always known that this is not just a school discipline issue. It's not just a civil rights issue, and it's a human rights issue in the sense that at the end of the day, without community, we are not going to be able to win this, and we are your first, your last, and your everything, to quote some Barry White. And just to say that we know this is a room full of very important people, but I also want to say that I think those of us who have been organizing parents and youth know that we want to be the difference maker in this movement. We want the organizing to get to such a level of depth and strategic thinking that we want to really cut into this issue once and for all, because it is tiring to hear this issue again and again. I'm sure many of you who have been working in this, within the institutional structure for decades, these are the same children again and again, but now we've finally been able to get traction on the way that they're actually pushed out. And so I just want to give a shout out to all our community organizing groups in the room that filled this hall today. And I dare say that, and I know the California Endowment says it to us too, that without our work, all of us, we would not be in the position we are today in California. So thank you everyone for being here today.
Really quickly before Secretary Ali closes this down, I just wanted to say, I would be remiss I didn't mention that when we think about the focus of energy and some of the things we can do, just as a reminder, that we have a predictor about when a student is going to, in essence, drop out. We start making these predictions by the 3rd grade, by their attendance and by their reading ability. So when we start looking at the differences that we can make and how we can focus energy, we do want to look at that preventative piece and look early in a child's life where we might have a bigger impact. Thank you.
You all have really just been terrific. It's been amazing to spend some time with you. I no doubt learned so much more than I could ever impart. You've heard it all, right? There's no one-size-fits-all fix to this. That is probably among the worst that we can do, right? Try and do sort of blanket answers to very complicated problems. It is also clear that while discipline is no doubt a part of the push-out phenomena. There are lots of others too. Students drop out because they're bored, not because they're too challenged. So this is really about transforming the schooling experience. If discipline is a lever and traction and gets this kind of attention, then go for it, but we can't stop here, right? If we're not in school learning the most rigorous curriculum to prepare us for life after high school, if our teachers and ourselves don't get the kind of supports we need to succeed, you're going to see this cycle bearing out in new ways with new labels. We just won't have these kind of data that shine the spotlight. So all of that to say that as encouraged as I am by this, finally, this kind of attention on this issue, one that doesn't blame the students anymore, but realizes that there is a systemic problems that gives rise to these kinds of disparities all over the country. It is also very important to remember that there's a reason why this got so popular so quickly, right? Because these folks have toiled at it for a decade. And from my vantage point, we've seen a whole lot of attention in the last 3 or 4 months in particular from lots of different policymakers. That's because the fixes can be easy. Be wary, right? Be wary. This is about transforming the way our schools work. This is about closing the opportunity gaps that give rise to all of the achievement gaps and discipline gaps when you unpack it enough. So if we only fix the discipline thing, we're not going to get the root of the problem. We're not going to make schools be what they should be, which is the great equalizer. So thank you.
Thank you very much. You can come on out. You know, I'm not going to hold you hostage back there. Thank you all very much, but I also, before we go and we exit to the courtyard for some refreshments and the ability to convene and talk, I want to thank a few folks, just very, very briefly. Number one, this event, this hearing, and we hear you, this hearing was put together and put on by the Statewide School Discipline Action Team. Okay, and it's made up of a lot of member organizations and advocates that have come together around this issue from different places across the state, and they're a really great organization. There's a great group of organizations, and if you're a part of the School Discipline Action Team, we just want to give you a quick round of applause for putting this on. Thank you. There are 5 women though who I want to thank who just did incredibly hard work, especially in the last 2 or 3 weeks, to make this happen. My colleague Mary Lou Fulton from the California Endowment was just unbelievable work. Sybil Grant from Faer Communications, Maisie Chin, the whole time, you know, unbelievable work. Tammy Liu from Labor Community Strategy Center, and Carrie Archbold, definitely. I want to also thank the LA Central Public Library for hosting us here. Russell, flawless audiovisual, pretty much. That almost never happens. I wanted to thank Secretary Ali came out from Washington, D.C. for this, okay? An incredibly busy schedule. To do this, to be here with us, to hear you, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal. She's a very busy and really committed public official at the federal government who's out here listening. And I really let's give her a round of applause, please, for being out and being committed to this. I think she set an important example for public officials everywhere that you really need to be totally committed to doing this, because this is really about the most vulnerable kids. And lastly, I want to thank, but most importantly, I want to thank the young people here in the room and the young people who came up and spoke. I'm extremely impressed And I got choked up a couple of times, as much because of the passion and the stories, but also because I was just so impressed with you all. It's a really fantastic thing, and really important that you are here, and you in the audience as well, that you're here and care deeply about this issue. Your commitment is the most important commitment. And I thank you. Let's give you a round of applause one more time.